Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today's webinar on the 2025 report card for America's Infrastructure, Making the Grade Schools. It's May 20th, 2026. Appreciate everyone's time and engagement for this learning opportunity today and your interest on school infrastructure, an important part of our national infrastructure. With that, I will turn it over to Greg D. Loretto from ASCE's Committee on America's Infrastructure to get us started. Greg?
Thanks, Josh. Well, to set the stage for my remarks, I'm a volunteer with the American Society of Civil Engineers, and I've been involved with ASCE's efforts in issuing a report card on America's infrastructure for the past 13 years. I also served as ASCE National President in 2013, and I've spent the ensuing years as a member of ASCE's Committee for America's Infrastructure. I spent my career as a public works director, city engineer, and the last 14 years of my career as the CEO for Oregon's second largest water utility. I had no schools experience. But a few years after I retired, I was appointed by Oregon's largest school district, Portland Public Schools, to their Citizen Bond Accountability Committee, responsible for providing professional oversight at the 30,000-foot level over the $4 billion worth of bonds that were approved by the voters for rebuilding all of their high schools and making improvements on most of the other 75 plus facilities in their portfolio. So over the past 6 years, I've learned a lot about school infrastructure and why ASCE has included schools in their report card on America's infrastructure. As the nation's oldest engineering society, representing 160,000 civil engineers who serve as one of the stewards of infrastructure here in the U.S. and around the globe, ASCE serves as a leading advocate for sustainable infrastructure. Next slide, please. Do I have to? Every 4 years. There we go. Next slide, please. Yeah. Every 4 years since 1998, ASCE has prepared a comprehensive assessment of the nation's major infrastructure categories in its infrastructure report card. And we use a simple A to F school grading system. The report card examines current infrastructure conditions and needs, assigns grades, and makes recommendations to raise them. In the latest report card, released in March of 2025, America's infrastructure received a grade of C, and that was our highest grade ever, and an improvement over our 2021 report card. The report card provides grades, individual grades for 18 categories, which includes for the first time broadband. And you can see what the 18 categories are there. Individually, 8 categories saw their grades rise from 2021 report card, and only 2, energy and rail, saw their grades drop. And what we found is where investments have been made, the grades have risen. Next slide, please. Now, these grades represent the condition of America's infrastructure and not one particular utility, one school district or agency, or even a state utility, school district, or agency. An A grade would mean exceptional and it's fit for the future. A B grade is good, it's adequate for now, and it is this grade that ASCE recommends for our infrastructure to maintain our economic prosperity and our quality of life. A C grade, it means mediocre, requires attention. A D grade means poor at risk, and an F grade, as you can imagine, means failing, critical, unfit for purpose. Next slide. Our methodology comprises the following areas: capacity, condition, funding, future need, operation and maintenance, public safety, resilience, and innovation. Note, ASCE doesn't create the data we use to evaluate the infrastructure categories. We rely on published data and then use our expertise from our members in those categories to assign the grades. The nation's infrastructure provides essential services to all our homes and businesses, and it's critical to our economic prosperity and our quality of life. Next slide. With the 2025 report card for America's infrastructure, ASCE estimates investment needs total $9.1 trillion for all 18 categories to reach a state of good repair, or a B grade. Public data in ASCE's 2024 Bridging the Gap study forecasts $5.4 trillion in public and private investments in the 10-year period 2024 to 2033. If Congress, states, and local governments continue recent funding levels. This leaves a gap of 3.7 trillion in investment for America's infrastructure if we keep investing at those current levels. However, if Congress, for example, were to snap back to investment levels in place prior to, say, the IIJA Act in federal spending, the gap would increase significantly. In fact, ASCE's Bridging the Gap study, which assesses 11 of the 18 categories in 2025 report card, finds that the snapback gap would equal the entirety of the 2025 report card gap of 3.7 trillion. And that doesn't even include schools. For schools, a need of 1.1 trillion is offset with only 671 billion in funding. And I'll do the math for you, or you can read it there. That leaves you an unfunded gap of 429 billion. Next slide. Well, to this end, ASCE recommends three broad areas to improve the grades and our infrastructure. First, we must continue sustained investment. It's obvious. I already spoke about the gap, and that only gets wider the longer we defer investing in our infrastructure. Second, we must prioritize resiliency. Across the U.S., disasters of greater intensity, duration, and frequency have wreaked havoc on communities of every size. In 2024, a total of 27 extreme weather events caused 568 deaths and over 182 billion in damages. In schools, they're often called out as places for sheltering in a disaster. The costs associated with building stronger infrastructure and structures demonstrate prudent investment. Every dollar spent on resilience and preparedness saves communities about $13 in post-disaster costs. And third, we have to advance policy and innovation. Infrastructure improvements rely on both public and private sectors to address needs and advance solutions. Policies provide a basis for projects to be integrated in communities, states, and regions, and those policies should be responsive to the needs of the public and encourage both safety and innovation. Next slide. So looking at schools, our 2021 report card gave schools a grade of D+. Nothing improved during those 4 years since our 2025 report card gave schools a grade of D+. America's more than 98,000 PK to 12 schools serve 49.4 million students. Now that's from our report, but I cheated. I looked ahead at our presenter slides and the number of schools has grown. However, these buildings that America's children rely on are aging. Nationwide, schools average 49 years old, but detailed data on their condition is scarce. And capacity of schools is mismatched. With a lower birth rate, many school districts are seeing falling enrollments and are having to close schools. Fast-growing school districts don't have enough classrooms, and class sizes can be large. The annual funding gap to reach a state of good repair for the nation's public schools has grown from 60 billion in 2016 to 85 billion in 2021. Old data to be sure, but as our panelists will point out, it's not getting any better. Next slide. Next slide. Now, critical needs at school buildings include water upgrades to remove lead and cooling systems amid increasing temperatures. And a 2021 study estimated that 13,700 700 additional schools must add air conditioning, representing more than 40 billion in investment. In Portland, Oregon, where I'm from, we never needed air conditioning. Fall and spring temperatures never reached 90 degrees, and few days were over 80. Well, that's since changed, and all new school facilities in Portland are air conditioned, and the district's going through a program of retrofitting old buildings. And where you have school closures for snow, we're now seeing school closures for heat. Next slide. In the previous slide, I spoke of the three areas need to raise the grades to bring our infrastructure into a state of good repair, or a B grade. For schools, that means looking at alternative financing, updating school facility conditions, assessment to reflect current needs. One of the problems ASCE has in grading schools is the lack of data. In fact, in Oregon, the local ASCE chapter there gave schools an incomplete grade for our state report card. We must strengthen district level capital planning for climate resilience and modern building codes. We must use life cycle cost analysis to optimize total project costs. It's been noted that long-term maintenance can be twice the cost of initial construction. And we must establish predictable, equitable funding for school infrastructure. Well, I am joined today by an expert panel that actually has been doing this for a lot longer than the 6 years that I have now been involved in schools. And so today with me, I'm going to turn it over first to Ali Talcart. She's going to give you some basic presentation, and then we'll move on to Bill Bradley, Pam Lofferman, Mary Filardo, and wrap this up. Also, if you have questions, there's a question box where you can put those in, and when we get done with our presentation, we'll take questions. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ali.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ali Talcott. I'm the Built America School Infrastructure Coalition. Greg, I actually think we're moving to Mary next, so I will talk more about the coalition. But can we do the next slide so I can make sure we stay on track? Perfect. Okay, Mary, I think this is actually over to you.
It is. Thank you,
Okay.
Ali, and
Yeah, of
thank you,
course.
Greg. I'm Mary Filardo, and I'm Executive Director of the 21st Century School Fund. And as Greg said, yes, over 30 years with a focus on public education infrastructure. And during that period of time, I've had the honor and pleasure of working on the State of Our Schools reports starting in 2013. And we finished recently the 2025 report, and many of the slides you'll be seeing from that report. And I think there's really three things that I want to talk about today. One is I think it's very important that as common understanding, we understand how massive the public education infrastructure is. The second thing is that the complexity of it is important and important to respect, both from our civic responsibilities, the government responsibilities, and industry responsibilities related to this complex infrastructure. But then the third is that we can get from a D to a B. I have absolute confidence that in the next 20 years that we can do this, but we cannot do it. It's not going to happen if we don't plan it. It's not going to happen by accident. So I want those three things, kind of kept in mind. And so first, let me talk a little bit about sort of the evidence of how massive this infrastructure is. Next slide, please. So the commercial building survey that the Department of Energy does puts K-12 education facilities those are in millions, so that's 10.6 billion gross square feet of space. We estimate that in the public sector, this is in our school districts where, over 80% of our kids attend school, is in the public sector. So about 8.3 billion square feet of building space. I mean, it's hard to get your head around that. That's a lot of roofs. That's a lot of boilers. That's a lot of chillers. That's a lot of doors and windows. So it's a very big piece of infrastructure, basically just behind warehouses and offices. Next slide. Go back one, Josh, thanks. And in terms of spending, in terms of all of the capital spending that's done on the nation's infrastructure, highways, transit, rail, you see the list on the slide, almost a quarter of it is in public schools. This is public infrastructure. So, when Greg just sort of says, oh, a $4 billion bond for Portland, that's a lot. That's a lot. Portland's actually not that big a district. And so what you can see is that it really does constitute a major share of capital outlay. Next slide. So there's a lot of numbers here, but we just got from the U.S. Census the recent numbers for 2024 fiscal outlay, and in 2024. The school districts reported spending 180 billion. This is on both maintenance and operations and 1 year of capital. So that is, when we look at a change, that is a change which is largely accounted for by federal support that has come through to districts from the COVID support. but part of what that did is that federal money leveraged other state money and it leveraged other local money. So you can see that even though on the previous 15 years about the average spend on school facilities by school districts was about 156.7 billion. But this last year's data shows that there really is much more effort going in. And just to kind of help people get it down to scale, billions are hard to do. There was about $3,800 a student that was spent on capital and maintenance and operations, which was about $21 a square foot. But if you know anything about what it costs to do school construction, it is not $21 a square foot. Next slide. So what we saw, this is where Greg was talking about kind of over time, that the gap has been increasing. Now, I have to say, our 2025 gap that we estimated is, we think, on the very conservative side. Part of what we kept hearing from districts and states as we were using on average about $416 a square foot as a replacement value is that was not enough, that they were spending far more than that on their school construction. Now, what that means is that gap is really considerably more than the 85 billion. Next slide. So that you can see in the dollars and in the square footage and in the space that it's complicated. And this is that it's big. And now I'm going to show you some of the complexity of it. So this is a survey that was done by the U.S. Department of Education in 2023. And this is on the age of facilities. And what you can see is sort of the bottom half that's the number of schools built before basically 1970 to 1979. And one of the things that I was struck by on this one is that 19,000, people didn't know how old they were. Now, I suspect that's because they were older and not in their memory. But what this also doesn't really tell you, but anybody that has done any work in schools knows, is that, one part of the school was built in 1940, then another part was built in 1960, and then there was the part from 1975, and then there was the 2000. And so the complexity of the systems and the different heating systems, different types of roofs, different kinds of everything, it is a very mixed age profile. So design and also standards profile in these buildings. So they're complicated buildings, each one generally. Next slide, please. The other thing that, actually has been fantastic, we have learned a lot about facilities and the built environment and what makes them healthy, what makes them safe, what makes them great learning environments. And I know Pam is going to speak to that, and Bill later on. But we have some other challenges that we haven't faced before around the resilience. Greg spoke to it, around some of the concerns about security within schools and around schools, and certainly around the environmental climate-related challenges about buildings and the way buildings are maintained and operated. And then, as again Greg mentioned, our demographics are changing. And our schools as centers of our community are really critical for children, but not just, kindergarten to 12th grade, but preschool, daycare, and even for elder care. I think these centers of community are going to be more and more important to our neighborhoods. Next slide. So I couldn't resist putting this in there. You're not supposed to be able to read what it says, but this is from California, and this is their okay, how do you get a school built plan and design process? And what I want you to look is the different colors. The different colors mean that these are different agencies that are responsible for different aspects of the school construction program. So it's the Office of Public School Construction, it's the Department of Education, it's the Division of the State Architect, it's the Department of Environment. There's a lot of different pieces associated with these public spaces because we hold them to high standards. And so what that means is our processes are complex. Next slide. That's just planning and design, right? This is funding, bidding, construction, move in, and close out. So again, this is a very, we have charged our school districts with managing a very complex process, which is partly why they do it with industry. Next slide. So not only is the sort of built process itself complicated and the standards that school districts are charged to follow important, but there is a really complicated environment of state policy and state roles and responsibilities associated with the local district responsibilities. And there's I think, Josh, you'll make the slide deck available to folks because this is a link. It's to our website, and we've been documenting state facility policy. And part of what we're finding is that it is actually very, very complicated and very siloed from various departments and various sort of responsibilities for security or for air quality or for life safety. So the policy is complicated. The way it's funded is complicated. So again, this is an infrastructure world that it really takes experts to navigate. Next slide. But even with that, I think that there is absolutely a path forward so that we can, by 2050, we can be at a B. I'd like to be at a B plus, but if I was noticing ports are at a B already, right? We should have schools as good as our ports, right? So next slide. And there's basically, it's simple, and of course it's not simple. But we have to start with a shared vision. We have to think that we deserve and are capable of having modern schools in all of our communities by 2050. If we think we can't do it, if we don't care about it, if we don't have that vision, believe me, it's not going to happen. So I think we need to first really be clear that this is something that our kids deserve, our communities need, and we should be able to deliver. The other thing, though, of course, associated with that is, you can imagine that all you want, but if you don't have the civic, governmental, and industry and labor capacity to deliver, you're not going to get there. So you have to do both the will and the capacity at the same time. And of course, a key part of that is going to be a stable, sufficient, and equitable system for funding. And I was playing around with over 24 years. If we took what we need using current practices, it's about $5.8 trillion. That's 242 billion a year. We're actually on track for spending 3.8 trillion a year. So it's not like we're not doing it, right? That's a gap of 2 trillion. That's the $85 billion gap. But next slide, please. But we think a major way, however, to address our gap is actually to get better value for the dollars that we're spending. And that means that we're going to have to improve our management and labor practices for operations, maintenance, and repairs. The way we take care of the buildings that we have to do more and better. And that partly means supporting the managers and the workers in that field with whatever training, whatever technical assistance they need to do better with what we have. The other thing is that all of the piecemeal work that we've been doing, whether it's, we're going to do a security vestibule, or we're going to improve our air quality, and we're going to just do air quality, and we're going to sort of ignore all the other elements of our buildings and our sites. We have to do more comprehensive projects. It doesn't mean you have to do them all at one time, but you have to plan them and work to do as much as you can at one time. The other thing is that the policies for in terms of government practice, we have to figure out where we can save, whether it's on financing costs, whether it's on procurement systems, whether it's on bidding management. We have to kind of go through all of the processes and work through, maybe it's only 1% here and 1% there, but it will add up so that we should be able to cut, I think, between 10 and 15% from what are these pushing rising costs that we're being faced. And then finally, the thing is really true that we have to have some governance and space efficiencies And it has to do with how many school districts we have. That frankly, the explosion of charters is one of the most inefficient things that we've done in public education in my lifetime. And we're going to have to look carefully at this notion that everybody gets to choose everything for anybody, and because it's really expensive. And so I think that we have to find ways to be, practical about our governance and practical about our space. Next slide. So part of that adequate and fair funding, and Allie's going to be able to speak to sort of what we can do a little bit more about this, but it is really on local districts, and local districts cannot carry the load for, essentially 50 years of funding issues. So anyway, so let me just finish there. The states are going to have to do more. The locals have been doing a ton, and the feds are going to need to do more. They're already doing about 31% in other infrastructure. We think they can do more. We know they can do more for us on the K-12 side. And then the last slide. One of the things, have the honor of working with the National Center on School Infrastructure as one of the consortium partners. It's a US funded center for technical assistance and information, but we would love to have more success cases. Pam and Bill are going to talk about some, but send us, assessments, plans, processes, training information, whatever you have, that where you say, this is how we can get better. This is how we can do better. This is how we can get to our B. Anyway, we're interested in that always. So thank you. I'm going to stop there.
Great, Mary. Excellent. Excellent presentation. And so again, if you have questions, put them in the question box, but she provided some pretty good information. We're now going to go to Pam and Bill are going to address needs through the projects. Why does it cost so much to build, maintain facilities? We'll start out with Pam. I know that in my experience here in Portland, they started rebuilding these high schools in 2012, and it cost $120 million to build the high school I went to, and I was a kid here, and it will hold 1,700. Today, they're building the same size high schools. 3 of them are $450 million. They have quadrupled in price since 2012. So Pam and Bill, you can tell us why, and we'll start with Pam. You'll kick it off.
Fantastic. I am Pam Lefferman. I am a senior principal with DLR Group, which is an integrated AE firm that also includes a lot of specialists such as educators and so on. I think the one thing that we always need to keep in mind is the importance of really addressing our true clients, our students. And so if we go to the next slide, I'm going to cede 2 minutes of my time to the governor of the U.S. Virgin Islands and now Commissioner of Dr. Hedrington. I am not hearing any sound. Are you all hearing sound?
I am not.
Not yet.
Can you parrot it's Pam?
Josh is running it. Okay, so I will
Still not coming through.
No.
No, sir. Fine. So it's a great presentation, and it really focuses on, if you will, setting the bar high. The U.S. Virgin Islands is about 100,000 people, about 5,000 in each island, St. Croix and St. Thomas, about 10,000 students, and those are divided in half in terms of high school and pre-K 8. Subsequent to the devastating hurricanes of Maria and Irma in September of 2017, there was the Bipartisan Budget Act. We can go to the next slide, Josh. That really focused on, if you will, FEMA funding for the islands, and schools were recognized as part of infrastructure for all of the reasons that they should be, that Mary kind of talked a little bit about. These are centers of the community and an incredibly important piece of the fabric within the islands. Interestingly enough, the Bipartisan Budget Act, I love saying that, bipartisan, really focused on prudent replacement as per industry standards. And as you can well imagine, there's not a lot of standards, certainly at the time when we started this in 2020, for federal schools. There's some examples related to DODEA, the Department of Defense schools. And in fact, there were recognized standards right after the hurricanes that were North Carolina's ASCE. So those were kind of two starting places. But the process of master planning those first 6 months to June of 2020 involved a number of things as far as visioning, all of the things you typically would do to say, how do you make sure that you are providing and prioritizing the right things in the right order, as well as, if we go to the next slide, that conversation of industry standards and how do you define that as related to appropriate federal funding. I think this is really important when you think about that conversation of all of the funding elements that have to go in. There were 45 buildings that were assessed to create, at the end of the day, a $3.68 billion budget for consolidated schools, that 20 schools that represent 5 new pre-K-8s on each island, 2 high schools, and a new K-12 on St. John. So it was a very robust process that really took into account everything that you typically would include in master plan, but also started to include the funding in and looking at alternate sources of funding. We go to the next slide. So some of the lessons learned were certainly research-informed standards. We not only looked at the DODEA as precedent, but also North Carolina, LA Unified, New York City standards, a lot of different ed specs to really think about what is important in terms of what I'll call educational inadequacy. A lot of times when you're looking at funding, particularly for repairs, or that it's really only on building systems. So what is that culture and confidence? What is that pedagogical vision that really helped us put together a robust set of guidelines that also ensures better investments and better outcomes? Obviously, if you're going to invest $3.68 billion, you better be sure that your structure, your building systems are going to last and are going to be operationally efficient. Next one, please. There's also the conversation when you think about architecture that enables. DLR Group does do primary research, and so that linkage between student engagement and teacher engagement really, next one please, started to set up when reverse engineered those 10 critical indicators that provide, if you will, that best linkage of students' engagement. Because can't necessarily say, even though as an architect I'd love to be able to say this, can't say architecture makes students learn better, but students are better engaged, then they pay more attention and that opportunity to learn is increased. Out of these 10 critical factors, in fact, about half of them are indeed related to building systems. The other half are really related to changing trends, emerging trends in teaching and learning, and really those components that are related to community resources. I think the other thing that is a part of schools that is often overlooked, and this is for all you civil engineers out there, is adjacent ways, stormwater, how this affects the overall infrastructure of the community is always tied into schools, and that close-knit association needs to be acknowledged. Next one, please. Certainly this starts to look at what were all those guiding principles that were that pedagogical vision of how we could design the architecture, the engineering, the built result to make sure that it was in alignment with the teaching and the learning mission of the Virgin Islands. Next one, please. Starting point was really an inquiry-based curriculum. This starts to really identify more student-centric, like type of learning and really focuses on those types of spaces. And I'll say activities that need to go into a school. Oftentimes schools are programmed as little squares of space and don't necessarily take into account the activities that are so integral to a 21st century program. Next one, please. So I've already talked a little bit about those, all in all, 20 new buildings or 20 buildings. 4 of those are existing, but more or less really providing replacement on a system-wide basis, all under the auspices of FEMA and federal funding and guidelines. So I think this really provides an important benchmark for what the federal government can do in terms of augmenting, certainly after the hurricanes, but also any community within the United States, because the infrastructure component is important to community. Certainly the educational, pedagogical needs to be driven by state and local authorities, but that infrastructure part that supports community is an important component. Next one, please. And so then St. Croix, and then so that total of 20 projects. Next, please. I'm actually speaking from Christensen St. Croix. This is Arthur Richards Pre-K-8 school. It is slated to open in August of this year, and I think it really starts to set the bar. It is unfortunate that it has taken almost 10 years to get to the first school. So we need to provide better planning, better standards that allow us to expedite and provide students with forward-facing architecture in schools that allow them all to really pursue their passions. Next, please. Here's the vision of, you can see the existing on the left and the proposed Charlotte-Omley High School that is in downtown Charlotte-Omley. A combination of really kind of modern yet vernacular architecture that is appropriate to the culture and context that it is built in. And the last slide that I'm going to show about schools, this is the Sprague Pre-K-12. Currently, there is no high school on St. John. Students take the ferry to St. Thomas. This will be the first ever Pre-K-12. It is completely off the grid because, oh, there wouldn't be a grid there. So I think in terms of the resiliency that's required with PV panels, with rainwater that is harvested from the roof and filtered and contained wastewater treatment plant on site, not everyone needs to go to these extremes, but I think as a benchmark on what can be done, parts of this and components of this can start to provide examples to communities that are maybe in the rural parts of the country where they don't necessarily have the access to all of the infrastructure they need. Next, please. So very quickly, it was a hit of parts that was put together. Next, please. I'm trying to get to Bill Bradley. Here's some diagrams related to that vernacular architecture. I think all of us need to think about the infrastructure and how it really sets into that community context. Next, please. And in the case of the Virgin Islands, labor and goods all get shipped in. So how can projects be not only a kit of parts, but be componentized to once again provide the best value for that construction? Next, please. And in the case of the Virgin Islands, really tried to use those deep porches, overhangs, transition from the outside to the inside that allows you to help that air conditioning load. Next, please. And then I think this is one of my last slides. Unfortunately, WAPA, Water Authority, Water and Power Authority, has some real challenges in terms of providing consistent power. 56 days of school was lost because if you have a power outage for more than 3 hours, the teacher unions allowed to require for the school to shut down. So we are providing PV panels, not as a sustainability, but resilience as a driver at all of the schools. So we're actually had an interesting conversation this morning in terms of how do you put together a virtual power plant that combines the robustness of multiple panels at multiple schools that can then reverse feed and provide power in an island that already is somewhat impaired with the capacity versus the power plant. Next, please. And so that was very fast, Phil. Certainly ask me any questions. I think that the complexity and diversity of kind of questions in and design and built outcomes out is a very exciting one. Certainly the proof will be start to become evident as these first schools start to open. But I hope, I believe, will be a fantastic example of everything from stormwater to merging immersive technology to teaching and learning to architecture that inspires and enables. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pam. We'll now turn over the next part to Bill, who'll talk about the role of architecture. Bill?
Well, thank you so much. And thank you, Pam. You, Pam, and Mary both bring such passion, energy, and knowledge to the subject. You're both greatly appreciated and a tough act to follow, but I'll do my best. Before I try, though, I want to thank Greg and Josh for inviting me to participate, and the ASCE for taking on this very important topic, and everyone who joined us today to join the discussion. So thank you. I'm going to challenge you today. I hope that you leave this conversation with Pam, Mary, the rest feeling challenged, but also inspired by the possibilities, and hopeful that you can make a contribution, because I think it's incumbent upon all of us to do this together to span the gap. The report, as Greg mentioned, is clear. We're failing our students, or very nearly so. And the imperative is clear too. We have to do better collectively. Mary said that our students deserve better, and she's not wrong. Our students are our most vulnerable population, and they're solely reliant on us to provide them not with just adequate, but aspirational facilities in which to learn and grow. We challenge them as adults to make the most of their educational opportunity to excel and make their world better for themselves and others. And our charge to ourselves should be no less. So the need is clear. The ASCE report card indicates we're running a deficit of $85 billion annually. And though the sense of urgency around building capacity may be waning, the sense of urgency around addressing deferred maintenance and retrofitting in support of modern instruction is increasing. There is therefore no doubt that each of us will be given multiple opportunities to make an impact on facilities in the very near future. And when given that opportunity, whether big or small, we must leverage it to the fullest. So the built environment, I think, can have a profoundly positive impact on the lives of students and teachers. But I think we're just scratching the surface when it comes to leveraging facilities as an effective medium for enhancing teaching and learning. So why is that? Well, Greg mentioned at the beginning, cost seems to be the most obvious reason. Greg, why do schools cost so much? Things are expensive, right? Lots of reasons. Buildings are huge and they're complex. It seems there's never enough money to do the things we want to do or even need to do. But I think there's more to it than that. Perhaps we don't fully understand just how impactful facilities can be, and so stop short of trying to make them great. I'm going to close with a possible remedy for the issue of cost. But before I do, I'd like to share how I think we can do more with the opportunities when they present themselves. So Maslow's hierarchy and Bloom's taxonomy illustrate the difference between merely surviving and thriving. And they begin with the necessity of meeting our basic physiological needs and continue in a stepwise manner through achieving our best selves. The educational pyramid, which I developed some time ago as part of my dissertation about the role of architecture, which is to say all the built environment, including the site for sure, the role of architecture in education, is similar to those hierarchies in that it begins with an understanding and appreciation of students' basic physiological needs that must be met first. And then it concludes with this idea that facilities at their best can reinforce aspirational ideas and educational best practices. So let's have a look. Space Fundamentally, architecture defines space, providing instructionally appropriate places for learning while addressing our basic human need for shelter. And there's a lot to unpack here, but I'll summarize it like this. A student who's too hot because the air conditioner doesn't work or is perhaps non-existent, too cold because windows and walls are insulated, or wet because the roof is leaking perhaps, is not learning because in that moment, they're more focused on getting their basic physiological needs met. Likewise, a teacher in a space that's inappropriate for modern instruction is far less able to do their job effectively. In general, I think we do a pretty good job of meeting this basic level of physiological needs, yet the report does state that there still exists a $40 billion deficit when it comes to properly heating and cooling schools. So there is still room to improve on this most basic level. Mary said she feels confident we can get to a B. I think I feel confident that we'll close this gap in the years to come. But when we do, when that project comes up, not to do it piecemeal, as was said earlier, what else can we do and how else we might leverage that at the same time? But facilities aren't just collection of spaces. They're also the places in and on which they are set. I think we use prototypes to mitigate risk, and I don't have any objections to a prototype per se, as long as they're able to adapt to a wide variety of site conditions, can accommodate local district programming and curriculum, and allow for the possibility of reflecting the local communities they serve. I play a game with my kids, or I used to when they were little, that I called, is it a school or is it a prison? Where I'd ask them to use contextual clues to guess which it was. And it's harder than you might think. All to say, when we're in the process of renovating a building or building new space, we can't forget about place. The facility should be exciting and inviting, derivative of the curriculum and community, and a place where every student feels seen and can be known. The school building should be intuitive as well. And this is my challenge to my fellow architects, to simplify for the sake of a better occupant experience. Often I think less is more. And no, I didn't come up with that myself. Fundamentally, a building plan ought to respond to two things: the site and the program, and to do so as efficiently as possible so that students, teachers, and visitors alike can understand the layout in an instant and intuit how to navigate it and feel welcome, safe, and secure. Thank you. So, I mean, here's an example. I mean, how many times have we not been able to find the front door of a school? That just seems ridiculous. We've missed the mark. In my opinion, those first three levels are fundamental to design and agnostic of type. Space, place, and sign or signal. They apply to schools as well as houses and museums, airports, office buildings, churches, and anything else you can imagine. If for some reason with schools, I feel like sometimes we stop short. So if you're a building owner on the call or an operator, and you can click, Greg, thank you. I challenge you to reflect on your facilities and ask whether or not they rise to that level of space, place, and signal. And if not, I challenge you to challenge your architects and engineers to make it so. As I said before, this is basic design 101, and it shouldn't cost any more money to implement. And you shouldn't expect less for your money. The next level on the pyramid is that the architecture reads like a book. Done well with intent, this can be particularly beneficial to schools. It's not new, though. We've been reading buildings for years. Take a cathedral, for instance, where lessons from the Bible and local history are told through symbols and sculpture throughout. Why not do more of this in school facilities? Why not layer the embedded lessons in classrooms in and on the walls and halls and around the school site? Why not articulate materials and building systems to reinforce lessons in math, science, social studies, history, etc.? Maria Montessori famously talks about the environment in which learning happens as the third teacher. A learning environment that intentionally reflects and reinforces the lessons taught within it begins to tap the potential of architecture as an effective medium for enhancing teaching and learning. To borrow from the ASCE, it makes the grade. At the top of the pyramid is the idea of architecture as an agent for change. To be effective at such, it has to first accomplish everything in the pyramid below. But if it does all those things, it has the potential to be profoundly different. In other words, you can leverage the capital opportunity to address a challenge or condition or even affect a paradigm shift. Thomas Jefferson did this when he designed the academical village at the University of Virginia as a counterpoint to the academic halls of his era, and a statement about the nature of learning as a fundamentally social endeavor. And shout out to my daughter who graduated from UVA on Saturday. Proud parent. In Winnetka, Illinois, you can click Superintendent of Schools Carlton Washburn and architect Arrow Saarinen did so when they recognized the importance of appropriate scale and child ergonomics and designed Crow Island Elementary School to fit elementary learners, which had never been thought about in that way. And Superintendent of Schools David Savine and SHW Group, now Stantec, did so when he wanted to signal to an underserved part of that community that they mattered too in the new Frederick County Middle School in Virginia. For the building owners on the call, I challenge you to think about how you want to affect positive change and how your next project, big or small, new or renovation, might allow you to do that. So that's a bit about what's possible when given the opportunity, but it doesn't solve the question of cost. To that question, I offer two things. First, thoughtful design, good design doesn't have to be more expensive. It just has to be more thoughtful, more intentional. In some cases, that might take more time. It doesn't necessarily have to cost more money. On the contrary, good design is often simpler and done well. It can actually save money, both in first cost and life cycle. Second, there are mechanisms for providing funding for both first and operational cost if you're willing to do a little extra legwork. P3 alternative delivery is one such mechanism. If you're not familiar, P3 project delivery, so-called public-private partnerships, is a long-term contractual agreement whereby a school board partners with a private consortium to deliver some or all aspects of a school's design, construction, even financing, even maintenance. In Philadelphia, the School District of Philadelphia leveraged P3 design to design, construct, and finance their new pre-K through 8 Northeast Community Propel Academy. The building, which opened its doors to 1,600 students in 2021, is 185,000 square feet on 95 acres and cost $80 million to do during the pandemic. In Prince George's County, Maryland, the school board leveraged P3 design to construct, finance, and maintain 5 new middle schools and 1 new pre-K 8 school. This process was completed in just 3 years and $485 million privately financed and maintained, offering a projected $170 million in savings to the district over 30 years. So when does it make sense for school boards to leverage P3? If you're facing significant facility backlog or growth, it might. If you need to deliver multiple schools quickly, it might. If you have limited bonding capacity and are willing to manage long-term contracts, it might. So a P3, not a panacea necessarily for all that ails you, nor does it offer a one-size-fits-all solution, but a P3 might be truly beneficial in the right circumstances. So whether a P3 or through more traditional methods, and I think you can click, or you can stay there. Oh, yeah, same, yeah. Thank you. If you have an opportunity to gauge a capital project, again, large or small, new or renovated, don't miss the opportunity to leverage it, both the project and the resulting facility improvements to make a profound difference. And we're spending a lot of money and it ought to be well spent. Don't stop short. Consider the negative impacts. Consider the positive and the negative impacts that a facility can have on teachers and learners, and be very intentional and deliberate about erring grossly on the side of positive. You can click twice. And consider the educational design pyramid discussed earlier. Expect more of your designers and yourselves, and do what's right for the students and teachers, and let the mark you leave on their behalf be positive and lasting. With that, I'll turn it over. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Bill. And thanks to everybody that has come before me. I am Allie Talcott. I'm the Executive Director of the Build America School Infrastructure Coalition. And we believe that all communities deserve inspiring, safe, healthy, sustainable, and modern public school buildings and grounds. It's really inspiring to see, the work actually happening. Bill and Pam, and then of course, Mary, I know you and I have been working together for so many years. BASIC is a diverse national coalition united in advocacy for a robust and reliable role in modernizing the nation's public school facilities. And so when we say more robust, we mean more policies that support investments in school infrastructure to close those gaps that Mary and Greg were talking about at the beginning of our time together. And so I have spent the last 15 years here in DC advocating for policies that improve students' lives and have helped secure billions of dollars from the federal government. And so, as executive director of BASIC, I know that the investments needed are possible. It is just a question of whether or not Congress has the will to do it. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But let's move to the next slide. When I say diverse coalition, I truly, truly mean it. So for any of you that might work in the education space, it is very rare that we have such a robust coalition of members that are in the education spaces, in the green spaces, in the industry spaces, all coming together to support a singular mission like basics, which is again to really have a more robust and reliable role from the federal government in doing everything we talked about today to solve the school infrastructure crisis. So really want to thank all of our members and our partners. Oh, and I clearly forgot to change the top of the slide, but NAFIS gets a special shout out today. Why don't we move to the next slide? So what is so important about our relationship with ASCE is that ASCE validates exactly what we already know, but for some reason Congress doesn't. And that is that school infrastructure is infrastructure. Mary's chart showed us school infrastructure is infrastructure. And I don't know about you all, but I don't really like bringing a D plus grade to members of Congress and then them not helping to fix this grade, right? I think that Congress has a real reason to invest in the nation's school infrastructure the same way that it does in all of the other categories of infrastructure. And so, what our role here is from BASIC is really to help Congress understand that. And so, I really want folks here to leave today with the understanding of one, why Congress doesn't necessarily think that school infrastructure is infrastructure, and two, how do we convince them? And so, again, we are so thankful for ASCE's report on school infrastructure because it does actually resonate with Congress of, oh, we didn't really think of it like that. But having, even if it's a D plus grade, having any grade at all alongside those other sectors of infrastructure is an incredibly validating point. Again, when we're starting from a really tough place in Congress. So why don't we go to the next slide? So this is not a red or blue issue. We unfortunately lack support on both sides of the aisle when it comes to how Congress thinks about supporting school infrastructure. So many members, I say some, but it's actually many members of Congress view school infrastructure as solely a state and local issue. And they say that because education is primarily a state and local issue. And so the issue of school facilities and buildings and grounds becomes pitted essentially as an education issue. And yes, the facility conditions do affect, as we all just talked about, educational outcomes and health and safety of the students and the educators that are in those buildings. This is not an education issue, right? We're not talking about curriculum or educator supports or all of the other things that traditionally fall within an education sector specific bucket. We are talking about fundamentally an infrastructure sector. And so school buildings and grounds, right, are brick and mortar, and they should be treated like the other 17 categories in ASCE's report. But we struggle here because on the one hand, you have Democrats saying we don't really want these kinds of big dollars coming out of our education budget when we're already so cash strapped. And that message resonates from the state and local issue. And it's true. At the state and local levels and the federal levels, funding for education has consistently gone down over the last decade, has not kept up with inflation. There are tons and tons of programs that are continuously receiving cuts at the federal level. And so when Congress is looking at a bill to, put these programs in or fund school construction, they are very limited because they get pushback on that side. On the other side, on the Republican side, we get the pushback that this is fundamentally a state issue. The locals should fix it. The federal government has nothing to do with schools and should have nothing to do with education in schools, and therefore we are not going to put money towards this. And so we are at basic at this point trying to one reverse that thinking on both sides of the aisle for different reasons, to coalesce the partners on the industry side, across the industry side, the education folks, the green folks, all anybody that touches the infrastructure space. We as a coalition need to get very disciplined about how we make the case that school infrastructure is infrastructure in order to close those gaps. Roads and highways were not infrastructure at the federal level until Eisenhower said so. So just because something hasn't been done does not mean that it can't be done. And so I'm hopeful that as we continue to show, based on what we saw in 2024, that at the most local levels, communities want to invest in rebuilding their schools. We don't not have support from the public at the very ground level. There is a major fundamental issue of how we're talking about this at our dinner tables, in our homes, at local school board meetings, and then what is being translated to members of Congress. And so that is the role of BASIC. If we can go to the next slide. What we are really focusing on as a coalition is the federal advocacy, being able to inform with all of the data that you all just shared and all of the anecdotes that the experts who came before me on this panel today have shared, to then find the common ground. Not every single politician is going to respond to the same thing. And so, what can we say to help unify them to understand? You might not love every single thing about this, but this problem is becoming too expensive for the states and locals to correct. There is clearly an upside and an ROI for every, I think it was in the beginning, resilience dollar has an ROI of 13, right? And so we know that we need to have these investments now, because as we just saw from the 2016 to the 2026 year, 2025, that gap is growing. And without the federal investment, it's not slowing down, it's getting worse. And so I will say there are some policies that we have in law, like the National Center on School Infrastructure and the Supporting American School or America's School Infrastructure grants, the SASE grants. But they are in total, that's about 50 million. Then there's the Renew America Schools grants that came out of Department of Energy. The way the federal government funds school infrastructure is actually a hodgepodge of policies, and it is nowhere near comprehensive enough, which is why BASIC's main mission, again, is that more robust role. And then again, the reliability of funding. So the three programs I just mentioned now, those programs are competitive grant programs. They are not guaranteed every year. And so that leaves a really, really unreliable set of funds for states and locals to rely on when we're talking about the federal support for school infrastructure. And then on the other side, sorry, one more. On the other side, we have the public awareness side. So we need to, as a coalition and as a movement and as a community of folks who care about these issues, which I know all of you do on this call, to inspire the public to care about school buildings as community center. I bet if I say, what did tobacco-free kids as a campaign do for America? Everybody could probably assume what that campaign did. I want the same thing for public school investments. I want for us to not just have the vision of the 2020 or the 2050 B plus grade. I want us to engage with it as a national movement so that at people's dinner tables, we have the equivalents of a tobacco-free kids or no kid hungry. And that really starts with educating the public about the impact of the unhealthy buildings, combating the negative narratives that are percolating up in Congress and that, tend to kill bills. And really helping folks understand like that there is actually a solution. And I feel like folks see these numbers and folks see the government unwilling to spend on things like schools and say there's no hope. But that is not true, right? We have seen Congress have the will to do something and do it. Um, and so I'm hopeful that for folks that want to learn more about BASIC or join our movement and join our coalition, that you please do so. And then with that, let's go to the next slide. And then I think it's back over to you, Greg. All right, cool.
Okay, well, thank you. Great panel, a lot of good information, and a big problem that we as a country need to face up to. Clearly important for us in the future of our country and of all of us. We got about a little over 25 minutes for questions, and I see we do have a few in the Q&A box. So let's see. See, we got some. Some are glad to see you. Now, a couple questions here. I assume these are when you're designing a building. We often have to worry about prime power, water, wastewater treatment in rural Alaska. And so then asking, are battery systems included with solar? I don't know, Bill, do you know about building in other parts of the country and what they have to contend with?
I've not done any work in Alaska, but I know that typically batteries are not part of a solar system, not at least scalable. To the extent that solar is generated in excess of the needs of a particular facility, that's often given back to the grid through some arrangement with the local power authority.
So, Greg, if I can chime in,
Yes.
Bill, that's assuming the power authority can accept it. So in fact,
Sure, if they're
in
off the grid as they are in the
in
Virgin Islands.
in the Virgin Islands, we actually are going to have a total of, I think, 12 megawatts in terms of batteries. And so it took me a while to understand energy doesn't come from solar panels. Energy comes from the batteries that convert the solar power to a source in the case of someplace like the Virgin Islands. So I'm sure that there are very specific climate conditions within Alaska with the extreme kind of cold versus summertime, if you will. I know in the Virgin Islands, it's a very consistent kind of 80, 85 degrees, but absolutely a component of the FEMA funding related to resilience so that kids can stay in school included the batteries.
Well, Pam, let's continue that conversation because one of the things that we were wondering about, you work in the U.S. Virgin Islands there and you're supporting school development and post-hurricane. And with the emergence of more extreme weather, resiliency, it's a focus, not only coastal communities, but really localities throughout the nation. What lessons could be applied to your efforts in the Virgin Islands for school districts which want to adopt resilience measures, and how do you think it could be done in a most cost-effective way?
I think you really need to break down the different components, if you will. So there's the energy side, of course, with PV panels and batteries. There's the issue related to water. In the case of most of our schools are going to collect rainwater from the roof and have storage of around 300,000 gallons. That is the service for the sprinklers. That includes a fairly robust reverse osmosis system in terms of filtering. All of those different parts of building systems that I think are absolutely applicable in any rural area, if you will. Certainly a lot of research was done by FEMA, and I even know P361, one of my favorite documents for safe rooms in terms of a lot of research related to how to make them impact resistant. What are the requirements for lateral loads? Virgin Islands, a lot of people don't realize we're right next to the Puerto Rico Trench. We're as seismically active as California. So we have tsunamis, hurricanes, and earthquakes. So I think that there's a lot of lessons learned in both the results, but also the approach to making sure you are really looking at the life cycle costs, even from an operational standpoint. Very hard to get janitors, building system operators, et cetera. So how do you invest money to make sure that the buildings are, I think, Bill, you talked a little bit about simple, not overly complex, and robust. And so I have learned, certainly in the last 2 years, to really not a lot of differences between using the word sustainability and resilient. And so I think all buildings as a public investment should be designed for long term. And so I'll pause with that. But later on, Greg, you can ask me about IEBC versus IBC.
Hey, I'll have to have you define it first. I do know that out here in Oregon, we're faced with the Cascadia subduction zone, an earthquake of around 9 something. And every school that the ones I'm involved in are designing with that thought in mind. And in fact, the last bond measure, they actually put money aside to just rebuild some of the schools based on that alone, because they're unreinforced masonry structures. And what happened was an outpouring of parents demanding that every school go through this and make sure, because it's their children that are in the school. And it has added some cost, but at the same time, you think about these schools are around for 100 years. While we may say the average is 49 years, they're around over 100 years, and so we got to think really long term about that. Hey Pam, while we're still on you, Josh said he could run your video if you're interested in showing the video to the folks on the call.
I think that would be an inspirational almost end, and maybe we'll be so inspirational that we'll get some more questions.
Okay. Josh, if you want to tee that up, and she said it would work.
Going back in time.
Yeah, there we go. No further. Okay.
The future of education in the Virgin Islands is probably the most crucial thing. When I look at what we're setting up in the Virgin Islands, it's a chance to expose students to a variety of opportunities.
Back in 2017, we were hit with 2 devastating Category 5 hurricanes, Hurricane Irma and Maria.
To a variety of opportunities.
Back in 2017, we were hit with 2 devastating Category 5 hurricanes, Hurricane Irma and Maria.
When the hurricanes hit back to back, it really impacted several of the buildings for the district. One of the first steps of the master plan was really understanding kind of what their current capacity is, serving just over 10,000 students, and that's approximately 2.7 million square feet of space. It's across 3 islands.
Never before had we ever had any type of measuring stick to determine what things do we want to have across all campuses, but also so that we could provide the type of education that our students so desperately need.
We see these schools as community anchors. We're looking forward to having these schools as hurricane shelters because they're already equipped with facilities. To the larger aspect of it is looking at them as opportunities for the community to come together and engage.
How do we really produce the type of education that sets the bar? And I see us in the BI as setting the bar.
Moving forward now, we not only have a chance to modernize our facilities, but we also have a chance to infuse the kind of things that will allow children to learn quicker and learn at a pace of technology is progressing today.
So it makes a huge difference when you have aspirational leaders such as the governor and now the commissioner of education that are willing to really go out and speak publicly about how important schools as a place are in order to really let the students and teachers engage and enable and engage and celebrate.
One of the questions, Pam, we had in the question box was a follow-up for your area. How do you address maintenance and operations in a remote location for some of that specialized infrastructure that you installed?
So one of the things we're really doing is we're developing curriculum adjacent to the renovations within the kind of a STEM platform across all grades and then evolving into CTE. So as you can well imagine, the need for building engineers, people that are interested in understanding how the systems work, hopefully understand that may be something that they want to do as a pathway of passion. Interestingly enough, the one school, the Ed Complex, was originally built back in the, in the 70s by Hess Oil and Martin Marietta in terms of really feeding the talent pipeline. They're no longer operational on the islands. And so there's been a little bit of a move away from, if you will, CTE and local industry. I think that the schools themselves as infrastructure will start to really stimulate the economy, both in terms of the service aspects needed to support the schools, but then we'll start to also attract more and more families that want to live in America's paradise. Why not?
So true. So following up on operations and maintenance, Mary, one of the questions we had was a significant part of a school upkeep involves ensuring staff can meet maintenance needs and uphold safety standards. In turn, ongoing attention avoids more costly repairs and replacements of equipment and infrastructure. So, what approaches work best, do you think, in training operations for facility management?
Well, it's pretty practical. And it gets a little bit to the fact that, so many of these schools are really unique environments. They're unique buildings. And it's listening to the custodians, the building engineers, the contractors who support them, and listening to what actually they have and see as problems, and then developing plans. I mean, I am a huge proponent of planning. There was a comment in the remarks earlier of someone on a school board and struggling with how we don't have any money, how on earth can we get what we need. It doesn't come by accident. It has to be planned, and it needs to be planned and can be planned even when there's no money, because you can't figure out how much money you need or where to get it until you've planned it. And in truth, with the maintenance and operations, it's an area that tends to be very reactive. And the districts, the school boards, they need to acknowledge that their maintenance staff, their workers need time to plan. Everybody knows teachers need planning time. Well, let me tell you, custodians and building engineers and repair workers, they need planning time too. And I think that, working together with them on, what are the most critical elements, getting the technical expertise to help them to find the economical ways to fix what's a problem. it will help. So they're very individualized. It's not like, oh, you're going to all sign up for this one class that's being taught at the community college. It's going to be, the time that they're given to actually develop some of the solutions and the plans to implement those solutions.
Excellent. This next question we got from our box, and I think it's yours, Allie. Says, I'm sympathetic to the local need, but I'm still unclear why local need necessarily obligates new federal investment, particularly when feds are already spending 1 trillion annually to service the current debt. Are there any states that are in reasonable shape on average due to diligent long-term planning? Likewise, have any school systems found ways to leverage facilities to generate significant new revenue?
Greg, I don't think you'll guess what I'm about to say, but Mary, I think you'll guess. This one is over to you.
You're passing the buck. All
It,
right,
it
I
Mary, there
am.
is.
you go.
It is. Well, and I'll talk a little bit about, there are absolutely states, some very red states. Wyoming is a state that funds its school districts. There's others as well that have big state programs, and it's a very important part of helping the districts. But in terms of why federal, part of what can happen is you can leverage state effort, you can leverage local effort with not very much federal. Nobody's saying that, oh, the feds are going to pay, 50% or 25% of the cost for what we need. We know that it's going to be mostly a state and local thing. But frankly, if the feds could come in at 10%, that would leverage a kind of equity across the country. It would lift the bar in terms of the quality of what we can do, and it would accelerate. It will absolutely accelerate the implementation of a modernization initiative. And so, it's just a matter of it's like I was in Wyoming, and I was complaining to the school district people because they were complaining about Cheyenne, right, the state. And I said, wait, they're paying for everything. And they said, well, that's our money. Well, frankly, it's our money in Washington too. So the fact that it's our money in Washington means that we can spend it on our schools in our communities because it's our money, right? And so I think it's just a matter of kind of saying, well, this is our money in Washington. It's our money in all these state capitals. And we should be much louder and clearer about the incredible return that we will get on the investments if we invest in our children. I mean, it's kind of known in a family, but it has to be very clear from a public sector activity that it's one of the best things that we do. And we've had a great educational system. And there was a comment about, why does Mary think charters are inefficient? And it's really kind of basic math, but I think that we've undervalued the incredible quality that we have gotten from our public schools. It's not perfect. We can always do better. You feel that as a parent. You can always do better, but it's been an amazing system that we've supported, over the centuries now in this country.
And I'll add, not on the public charter piece, but the question on why should the federal government be investing, right? In our argument and in our minds, right, as the coalition is look at the ASCE report, right? The federal government invests in other areas of infrastructure. And so therefore, for the same reasons and everything that Mary just said, they should too be investing in this sector. And there has not yet been a clear rationale. In fact, I was in offices again on both sides of the aisle on the Senate Appropriations Committee and their Senate Appropriations Committee staff and the Health, Education, and Labor Pensions Committee staff have both admittedly said they kind of run into arguments when they try to say and like carve out why schools shouldn't be, right? And so I do think that there is a role here for the federal government to play, not even getting into the policy of education or supplanting and supplementing, but just because school infrastructure is infrastructure and the federal government, for a whole host of reasons, supports locals and states on 17 other categories of infrastructure and must do so for schools.
Right. And Ally, the only thing I would say on behalf of the other infrastructure is you notice that they did not get very good grades. And that there is a need to do other infrastructure investment in this country, on water, on roads, on transit, on all so many of these areas. And I think that part of what we want to do as the schools infrastructure people is, is actually also support that there needs to be an expansion. We need to rethink the way we pay for things, who's paying for things in order to pay for the infrastructure, because we're a young country. We cannot afford to be in decline with our infrastructure at only 250 years, right? I'm sorry, but that's not long enough. And we have to have infrastructure that goes into the next 250 years, and we have to plan for it. And we're going to have to pay for it. So I think that we need to put our lot in there with the other infrastructure folks. It's not just that we want a part of what's there. We need to really invest in infrastructure in this country.
And Allie, if it makes you feel any better, I have been up on the Hill for 13 years about the other infrastructure categories. I don't get a whole lot of help there either. I've tried to get a gas tax increase to testify before House Ways and Means Committee. Thought we had one. Nope, we didn't get it.
No,
It's a tough nut.
we want to fight alongside because we don't
There
have
you
we don't have a scarcity mindset over here at Basic. We think all of this can and should be accomplished across all of the sectors
Right.
for all of our communities.
And if you read our report, we talk about infrastructure works together. These aren't individual categories. Can't have one without the other. And we make that point whenever we go up on the Hill ourselves and we're talking about them because we talk about a lot of them. Well, Bill, we're not letting you off the hook. We got a couple minutes left, so you get the last question here. We recognize newer facilities offer several benefits in fostering a safe learning environment. However, it's clear the costs involved in construction may not be an option for many school districts. So how can schools take action to reimagine existing buildings and readapt space to accommodate future needs in a financially sustainable manner?
That's a thoughtful question, going back to this idea that we're not exactly chasing capacity anymore as much as we are trying to keep up with aging infrastructure, building systems, but also increase educational adequacy. So make sure that the spaces are appropriate for what's being taught and learned. And I think it probably starts with an adaptive reuse plan as a core strategy, not a backup, right? So we don't do it at a later point. We're beginning to, we always think about capital plans. We think about what needs to be renovated, what needs to be new for capacity, but we don't really think about the adaptive reuse. So repositioning underutilized spaces, sorry. So what would that be? A cafeteria, admin area, libraries, rather than expanding a footprint. You might be talking about converting non-educational spaces like retail and offices into schools where appropriate. We're starting to see some of that, but to think about that up front as a strategy as opposed to a reaction. Design for flexibility instead of specificity. Office buildings are laid out that way, laid out on the grid, so the demising walls can be easily torn down or put up to flex and adapt over time depending on what program goes in there. And that's certainly appropriate for schools. Just thinking about career and technical education, how far that's come of late and how many different programs. So we want to be able to fill those spaces with whatever new program the community or the school needs. So flexibility, I think, designing that way. Use targeted system upgrades to improve performance. So again, going back to what Mary said about not doing things piecemeal, but thinking about this holistically, but looking at the indoor air quality, lighting, security, providing upgrades in spaces that will create a safe learning environment, safe in the broadest sense of the word. And then I think it is important that we align pedagogy, what it is we're teaching today and tomorrow, with the spaces needed to support those, increasingly diverse, I would say. And the budget early on, as an architect, we're challenged to meet a budget that I know was drafted 5 years ago without thought to inflation and probably wasn't necessarily congruent with the program to begin with. And so from the beginning, others on the call tell me if I'm wrong, we're fighting an uphill battle against a budget that wasn't realistic to begin with. So being very thoughtful about aligning pedagogy, space, and budget. And then going into the community and making educational spaces part of mixed use projects as well. Just off a couple things. Others?
Well,
Pam,
we're out of
Mary?
time, so I should
Okay.
probably end the
Oh,
conversation before it gets ended for us. I want to thank the panel for taking the time to do this today. It was a good discussion, and I hope the folks on the call enjoyed it as much as at least I did making the presentation. Josh, is there any further information, or we ring off?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. We just want to recognize quickly DLR Group for their support of this webinar and sponsorship here. Really appreciate their help. And also just want to ensure that everyone will be delivering the slides. Make sure to get copies of those following the presentation, as well as the recording of the presentation. And for any kind of further information on our school infrastructure chapter with the report card, you can go to www.infrastructurereportcard.org. That's where all of our information lives, and we have continued updates on report card related items, infrastructure policy, and other key topics. So thanks again.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
thank you.